Hi everyone, welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. I am Bryant Francis, your the voice inside your head. I am joined on this fine day by two lovely folks down in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Alex, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm still down here in the corner, just being Alex Waro, editor of Gamasutra.com and editor at Gamasutra.com. But we have a new guest, as we always do, and he's much more interesting than I am. Special guest, would you mind telling everybody who you are and what you do?
Hi, I'm Gabriel, and I'm the creator of Jettomero, which is the game that you are seeing right now.
Yeah, what is Jettomero? I know what it is, but could you explain for Alex, who does not? That's a lie. He does know what it is.
The premise is that you're a giant robot, and you're indestructible, and you're trying to save the universe, but you're very clumsy. So saving the universe is kind of tricky, and it's kind of a weird, more experimental game, more experiential, inspired by things like Journey and Nobi Nobi Boy.
I was just talking to Brian before we started about this game, and I mentioned Nobi Nobi Boy. So now I feel validated. A bit of this game, I think, is also, a core through line of the game is uncovering Jettomero's origin story. So as Brian sort of digs into that here, can we talk a little bit about your origin story as a game developer and how you came to work on this?
Sure. Yeah, I was doing QA for quite a while. I went to school for video production, and then when I got out of that, or during that, I was doing QA. It was my summer job. And so when I graduated, it was impossible to get a job doing video stuff, so I kept doing QA. And eventually I got promoted to sound designer since I had some background in sound. And that got me playing around with Unity Engine to do some integration of sounds into the games. And then the studio I was working at shut down. So I had tons of time and a little bit of inclination for the Unity stuff. So I just took the time and taught myself how to make games. And that was in 2013. So since then, I've done like a few smaller mobile games and just kind of experimented. And then this is my first kind of bigger game on a console, which is cool.
So there's like a lot to unpack there, and I kind of want to jump ahead to dig into what sort of attracted us to this game in the first place, which is the striking art. I didn't hear a lot of talk in there about the artwork you've done or your years at art school. How did the look of this game come about?
Yeah, I've definitely always been interested in visuals and stuff, and I'm not great with creating art with my hands. Like, I'm not a great drawer, I'm not a great painter, but I do have good visual sense, so doing art on a computer is kind of my ideal way to do it. And then the other thing is that when you're making a game entirely by yourself, you kind of need shortcuts, and the visuals aren't necessarily a cheat, but it was kind of like, okay, how can I make something that looks good without having to model everything super detailed and like spend a bunch of time on texturing? Because if I did try to make a game look like other games, it would have taken twice as long, and I don't have the skills to do that necessarily. So this was the solution.
That's all. I mean, that's super interesting because in trying to circumvent and cheat your like lack of resources and time and experience, you've created something that is unique and striking. Like I would not have guessed looking at this that this was something that was done to sort of as a workaround, right? To sort of avoid having to do a lot of heavy texture work or heavy detail work. It looks of a piece. It looks like a statement. It reminds me of like reading Calvin and Hobbes as a kid. So it's sort of crazy to hear that this is just like a workaround. How did you settle on this style? I guess I want to know. Like, playing around with Unity, learning C. Like, how did you come to focus on this as your aesthetic?
I kind of knew from the start that I wanted something bright and very attractive, like something that was visually appealing. And then I just kind of prototyped stuff for several months, playing around with things. And some of them were very different looking. Took me a while to decide whether I wanted to have real shading or do toon shading. Mm-hmm. And once I got into toon shading, I found something with the harsh shadows like that, with the black, basically. And that reminded me of Hellboy, which I really enjoy the art from. And then from there, I was like, what if I can make this look even more like that? And then from there, it was just kind of constantly pushing and looking at reference material and trying to pick up things that the comic books were doing and bring that back into the game.
Huh. So I wonder, as you're trying to translate that style, which stands out so well on a page, into a 3D environment that Brian is currently careening around, like, what did you learn? Like, was there unexpected challenges or like little tricks you could use to try and replicate that look in like a 3D environment?
Yeah, like I think the trickiest things were the effects, like the stuff around the planets, which I took from Jack Kirby. That was, it's a very 2D effect when you see it on the page, and trying to figure out how to make that work in 3D using particle systems and trying to figure out how to make it emit and translate when you're looking around it was a bit of a challenge.
So this may be hard to get into, like, because it's kind of technical, but like, how did you do it? Like, was it just a lot of trial and error? Was there a certain technique you settled upon?
It was a lot of prototyping and just playing around with it. Like, I would spend days working on something, and then like, there were lots of tests that didn't make it because either it didn't feel quite right or I just couldn't make it work properly. And so I'd have to abandon that and then either find a different way around it or just kind of leave that idea altogether and try to make up for it somewhere else.
There's a pretty sophisticated photo mode in this game that uses a lot of different filters that changes the environment kind of really quickly. Was that part of your process at all, making the filters that we saw there?
That kind of came in really late. Like, I wanted a way to take pictures in the game, and for a while I was just kind of pausing the Unity editor and then setting up my camera, and it took a very long time. And at a certain point I was like, I should just make some code so I can fly around. And I think it was for the first trailer I made, because I needed a way to kind of move through the environment using the controller to get something fluid that looked good. And then after I had the trailer camera set up, I thought, this is actually really cool. I should just make this a feature of the game. So the fact that it's weird that it's such an appealing part of the game now, but it was kind of incidental at the time and just something that happened because I was trying to capture the images for myself.
So I don't want to dig too much into like the story of this game and what happens, because it's Brian's first time and I want him to experience it for himself. But there's a certain like lackadaisical quality to this game. It's hard, if not impossible, to fail. You can't die, as far as I can tell. You just kind of inadvertently stumble around. I kind of want to sort of pick your brain about why you thought that was an interesting way to approach game design and what appealed. Why did that idea appeal to you?
There were kind of two factors that went in. The first was the original concept for the game. It was just going to be a 2D game, and it was kind of going to be a joke because you'd get to these planets where you had to save these small people, and you'd try to, and then you'd fail because you'd crush them all immediately. And then you have to go to a new planet, and there would be no game over state. It was kind of like you complete the game by making mistakes, and that's the only way to progress. And I thought that was interesting because most games, they'll make you restart if you fail. And then the other thing was that I played a lot of games that look great, and sometimes they're too hard, and I get frustrated. And I'm like, I just want to enjoy the game right now. And if I have to go back and replay this part over and over again, then it's going to be less enjoyable. So I wanted to create something that basically anyone could play and wouldn't get stuck or have to replay things like that.
Yeah, and it feels like that's especially topical given the Cuphead just finally came out. And you know, I had never watching that game develop and progress in the public, I had always known it would be a hard game, but there were some people who were sort of surprised and upset, I think, that they just wanted to see all the artwork people had created for that game. And it's a very tricky thing to get through. And this, you can sort of see everything at your leisure, which is a nice change of pace. Something I realize we should dig into, because I don't actually know myself. All these planets and systems, those aren't hand created, right? Are they all procedurally generated, or did you?
Yeah,
build
they're
them
all procedural. So they're basically just mesh. Like the planets themselves are meshes that I deform at runtime using. I just kind of drop. It's almost like a crater system where they just have deformers that form around them and then move the vertices based on the origin of those deformers. And then for the placement of objects, it's also just using raycasts and checking where they are. And yeah, pretty much everything on the planet is all procedural. The colors are procedural, and then there's relationships that I use to get hue offsets so that there's always going to be an appealing combination of colors on the planet.
Huh. So can we talk about that specifically for a second? Something I noticed you were you've been posting images on Twitter and calling for images, and you're right. All of them seem artistic. They all seem put together in a certain way. I don't know a lot about color theory. And I think a lot of developers, especially solo developers, maybe aren't up on that kind of stuff. So how did you set it up so that there will always be an appealing palette of colors at play in any shot, whether it's on a planet or in a solar system or what have you?
So the solar system, the sun and the background and the planets, those are all separate. So sometimes you get combinations that aren't as appealing, but I think that just the vividness of the colors across the board work well together. But the planets themselves, basically I'd calculate a hue offset of 0.5, so it would always be the complementary color, regardless of what. So I'd randomize the first color, and then the second color for like the buildings and the any kind of structure and stuff, that would always be an exact complementary color, which helped a lot. And then the water was kind of set off a little bit using another value. So it took a little bit of tuning to figure out what worked and what was too much. And then once I found something that looked good, I just went with that.
Yeah, it's. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say there's also some procedural work in the animation too, right, for the character?
Yeah, it's all physics based.
Yeah.
So basically, Jettomero is a ragdoll, and there's forces acting on the body once you land on the planet. So the head and the arm, the head's being pulled up by forces, and the arms are being pulled down by forces. And if you press the X and B button, you can raise its arms.
Yeah, Brian, when you land on a planet, I couldn't quite figure this out. So I know you can raise and you can press the D-pad to like cause him to stomp and jump.
Yeah.
And I never really. I mean, there's an explanation for why you should do that in certain areas, but like other than that, it just seems like a fun way to make him move around. Which is chill.
Like having the gamepad, I didn't have that many controls. Like there's no combat or inventory that you need to worry about. So I just wanted to add something to each button to make it more interactable and more fun, and just kind of something to play with.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot to unpack here that I think maybe we won't get onto about games as toys. Games as like just things to play around in, as opposed to like experiences to go through or challenges to be overcome. I just so, it's crazy to me that there is not necessarily a tie between the color of the suns and the individual planets, because like every time you go through a wormhole, it almost seems like you set it up on purpose, so the player sort of pops up in this very sort of striking and hapless pose floating in front of a sun. I don't know, it's hard to get into. Someone in chat mentions let me get the name here to be correct. Trash Can Fighter mentions the aesthetic for this. The aesthetic for this is amazing, and it's tricky to sort of get at the formation and refinement of an aesthetic when you're talking to somebody who maybe just kind of it sounds like you just did this out of inspiration and trial and error. So we should talk about that, I guess. Like, this game has been in development for years. Were there any like huge challenges that you really didn't anticipate going in?
I think the biggest challenge is not having a plan laid out and just kind of being like, I'm just going to make this thing and see what happens. And I was working a full-time job for a lot of it, so it wasn't like something I needed to be focused on or have a rigid plan. It was more like, okay, I have an idea that I want to try prototyping, and then I'll add to the game. And most of them made it in. There were a few things that I just pulled because they weren't working or didn't fit with the rest of it. But the biggest challenge is definitely being like, what is this actually? And it's hard justifying making a toy, I think, because there's not that many precedents for it. Like, Nobi Boy was a big influence, but I can't think of a lot of games that are quite like that. And so trying to figure out how to make a game that's like that, but not exactly the same thing, and then what are the rules that you need to create a game that is a toy.
Yeah, it's rad. It's great these things exist, but it's definitely like a territory that's much less charted than, say, how to make a puzzle platformer or how to design a racing game or something like that. I'm just curious on a personal level, how did you stay motivated for this long while working on this as a side project? I know there's big chunks in the middle where it's nothing. You can't see what it's going to be, and you're not entirely sure, what it will end up as. So how did you stay focused?
It was it was easier having it as a part-time thing because then I never felt like I was abandoning it if I left it alone because I did have a ton of other stuff I had to do. So it was kind of like when I felt like I had an idea, then I could sit down with it. And by the time I went full-time with it, I already had kind of most of the groundwork done. It was more of a matter of polishing and that kind of thing. And then along the way, I also had a couple art shows at my friend's studio where I made prints of the game, and so that was a fun way to kind of do something with the game that wasn't necessarily a finished product, but it was still very interesting, and people would come in and be like, oh, how did you make this? And they wouldn't realize it was stills from a video game because there was like paintings and stuff around, but it was fun taking the game out of context and using it as a different medium, I guess.
Yeah, I've never, I'm sure there's someone else has done that before, but that's not something we ever hear about. The idea that you would take prototype screenshots basically and take them to an art gallery. But it's cool. It's hecka cool. Brian, good job. Congratulations.
I'm a hero.
Yeah. We're kind of jumping around here, but I have so many questions. Like this game, it came together as a side project, a fun toy, not meant to be huge challenging, but like the narrative that you've put in is kind of dark. Like it's kind of messed up. At least as far as I've played, I haven't seen everything. I kind of want to, if you can, speak to that. Like, how did you go about trying to fit a story in around this concept you had, and sort of where did it take you?
I always like for my own stuff. I like kind of dark, absurd things, and I think that they go well together because if it's just all heavy and dark, then it kind of turns you off. But if you can combine comedy with tragedy, then it's way easier to swallow. And I like games that don't necessarily leave you feeling good about it because you're more likely to think about it more afterwards. And I think there's a lot of themes that I don't necessarily think people will pick out, or they'll get certain themes and other people get other themes. But I like packing in as much stuff as possible to a story and just let people kind of pull out what's relevant to them.
Man, how did you do these? This is probably a really basic question, but it's something I never really talked to people, especially someone who's basically a self-taught Unity developer. How did you do these cutscenes that are just like an interactive comic?
It's basically just an orthographic camera for the most part, and then I have different models, and then using the animator, just move them in for the intro sequence, and then after that it's just UI windows that are sitting over top that I fade in on input.
Nice.
Sorry, I'm just taking a moment to appreciate this.
Yeah, I like this game a lot. Have you seen a volcano yet, Brian? You got to stand on a volcano.
No, I'm working on it.
Okay, we got to find a volcano. It's not a big deal. I think it's cute. Okay, so this is not your first game, right? I mean, there was at least there was a mobile game that you crowdfunded before this, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is probably one of your like big first PC games. Am I on point with that?
Yeah. This is the game where I actually felt like I knew what I was doing for the most part, or it didn't feel like it was just a learning experience. It was like, okay, I'm making something that I feel good about, and it's basically what I wanted to do because I felt like I had all the tools and knowledge that I needed to make it, whereas previously it was like I had to readjust my design based on what I knew that I could do. In this game, I basically learned everything that I need to get it to where it was. So that was very satisfying. Yeah,
your career as an indie is really interesting because it comes in I guess any career would be interesting just by virtue of the fact the market changes so fast, but like especially yours, coming back from 2013 where it felt like crowdfunding was just becoming a thing, it's just becoming a real prospect for developers, to now where it seems maybe a little oversaturated. And the fact that you were able to do this, you funded this on Kickstarter and with a very modest goal, and you surpassed it, is kind of remarkable. So like I kind of want to dig into that for a minute. Why did you go to Kickstarter, and sort of what challenges did you find when you finally got your project funded?
So for this game, the Kickstarter was actually really late in the project. Like I basically had it all done. It was already, I think it might have already been approved by Xbox certification. So it was like all set to come out. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to do this Kickstarter. And the two things that I wanted basically were money for translations, because that was, the rest of the game development had basically been free or at least it was coming out of my own pocket, and I didn't spend money on anything. It was like pay for rent, pay for food. That's the cost of making Jettomero, because it was just me working on it. But translations were the main financial risk that I need to take, and especially for launch, you want to try to support as many languages as possible, because that's going to be the main push. And so that felt like it would be a good investment or a good thing to raise money for, so that I could hit the ground running a little bit better. And then the Kickstarter was also largely a marketing push, because no one had really heard of the game before. It was like I had under 1,000 people following on Twitter maybe, and I needed to get the word out more. And I think Kickstarter is really good for that, because it gets shared around and more people see it, and the Kickstarter homepage kind of draws in new audience. So that was the other half of the Kickstarter.
Oh, that's interesting. Let's talk about marketing as an indie, because this game, it does feel like it came out at a really busy time of year, which is every part of every year at this point. But it has such a unique and striking aesthetic that I kind of want to get a sense of how you went about getting out in front of people. I think we heard about it from a PR agency. Maybe I'm wrong. Did you use an outside PR agency? I
ended up hiring a PR company just basically the week that I was launching, because I was freaking out and I was like, no one knows about this, and I need someone who knows how to get this in front of people a little bit better than I do, because otherwise it could just fall flat, which would be really sad. So yeah, that was another investment that I made, and see how that's going. I think it's a difficult game to market.
Yeah, and I think a lot of indie devs sort of, now that we're sort of past the, I don't want to say the hype, but I almost felt like there was a certain golden age on Kickstarter and stuff, where there was a bunch of attention and a bunch of press around it, and now there's so many games out there that maybe that has sort of ceased to cut through the noise the way it used to. And I think a lot of indies are looking back at PR teams and looking maybe what can they do for me? So I want to know, clearly it got our attention. Other than that, has that route really paid off for you as a developer, or are you not really sure yet?
Sales wise, it's definitely not so much yet, but in terms of exposure, I think they've done a good job of getting it out in front of people like you and a few other, a bunch of news sites, because I don't think I would have had nearly as much coverage without them. And also the YouTube players, I know they've got it out to way more than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. So how did that go? Did you reach out to certain YouTubers, or did you just kind of throw out keys indiscriminately? Did you have a certain audience you were trying to get this game in front of at all?
I think I did a bad job of that. I emailed a couple influencers, and then once the game came out, I started getting emails from people, and had to filter through all of them, because some people it's I can't give the game away to everyone.
Yeah.
But definitely got a couple larger streamers that got in touch with me, and then I also signed up for Keymailer, which is a good site, because basically you just add keys for your game, and then anyone who has a verified account for streaming or YouTube, they can link up, and then they can request keys through that. So it was easy for me to just say, okay, you have this many followers, this many subscribers, here's a free copy, and so that was probably a really useful tool for me to get the game out in front of people who could play it and influence an audience.
Yeah, if you had to go back and do it all again, is there something you would do differently in terms of now that the game is out and released, and I'm sure you're working on ports, but in the run up to release, is there something you would have maybe not done or done more of that might have changed things?
I might have been tempted to instead of doing the marketing post-launch, to do it pre-launch, because I think that would have more of an impact. And also maybe just kind of feel out the waters a little more in terms of how people are going to receive it, and how to serve it to people, I guess.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, especially when you're, as Brian likes to say, a one-man band, right? When developers, especially small teams or individuals, are so focused on just getting the game to ship, that you don't necessarily even have brain space to think about how should I get the word out? How should I be drumming up buzz? I would have guessed that Kickstarter would sort of be helpful in that, because I assume there's an audience there. Once they back you, they want to know how the project is going. Did you have a lot of was that a big part of your process, was talking to backers and giving out updates, or was it so late in development that it really wasn't a thing?
It was pretty late. Basically, all my updates were just kind of looking back over the process and letting people know how certain things, like I'd have one update that was just about the animation system and one update that was just about how I made planets and that kind of thing. So that was a lot of fun for me to, as kind of a perspective, and just say, oh yeah, this was a cool thing. I have like years of screenshots that I can share. And, and I think people really like the updates. Like some people were saying these are some of the best updates I've seen. And I think that because the project is basically done, I had a lot of content to share, even though it wasn't necessarily like updates in terms of like what happened since last week. It was more like, this is just something that I have that I can share with you now.
Yeah, it's surprising to see in the last like month 2 games come out that have such striking art styles that are so reminiscent of classic cartoons. I realize this game and Cuphead are literally almost polar opposites in terms of like what they seek to achieve. Like Cuphead did go back to the 2D route and it's incredibly hard, and it's a totally different art style. But it's just really remarkable to see this kind of aesthetic at play in interactive experiences. I would guess maybe you could get some attention through the comic community, through the art community. I don't know how that works in Vancouver.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out how to do that, and also I feel like the game is good for children. Like I have a couple of cousins and my friends' kids, and they all really get into it. And I don't even know how you advertise to children with games anymore, because everyone's basically like 20 something who's going to spend.
I don't know. Brian, how you doing on this puzzle?
Got it. That was hard.
I really like this cipher idea. I'm just curious, Gabriel, where did it come from?
I think originally, like the look of it and the idea for a word puzzle was like imagining those old comic books that would have like a little thing you had to solve in it at the back of the book or whatever. And I like the idea of having that aesthetic for unlocking the backstory. And then I'm not sure how I got the idea for how it actually works. It was some fun code to write to kind of, because all the puzzles are procedural, so you'll never have the same answer in terms of like where to rotate the ciphers.
Yeah.
And the scramble's always going to be different, which is kind of cool.
How did you do that?
So basically I took the 26 character alphabet and then split it up into 5. I would randomly pull letters out of that alphabet into 5 different groups, and then all those groups would basically scan through the entire message and say, okay, this letter, this letter, this letter, those are all using letters from this group. And then whenever you change that group, it would offset those letters in the alphabet based on how much you turned the wheel by.
That's so sense. Yeah, I mean it does, but it's so interesting because you coded that and tied it to basically an algorithm. And there are moments in those puzzles where I feel like it's almost hand authored, like where, because of the way words are structured, you can have, like, if you're changing the 2 middle letters, it could be 2 E's or 2 O's, or it can be a TH or something. And like it often felt like there was some like meaningful thought behind which letters were set to be switched and what they could be switched into. And so the idea that was in some way just programmatically done is kind of remarkable.
Yeah, I think the language is interesting, how you kind of find patterns regardless of how it was intended. But it was a cool puzzle that I hadn't really seen done anywhere else. So that was a satisfying thing to create, and also just kind of fun to play with afterwards too, and be like, oh, this is like an interesting experience. That's separate from the rest of the game.
You keep referring to comics a lot. Interesting, old comic books, which is great, just because these styles are actually pretty clear. But I think it's funny, just because when I say comics, people think superheroes in America. But when you say comics, you're sort of talking about like the whole print medium and some of the artists who use the physical page pretty well. How do you like? Can you sort of tell us what you think about? I don't know, like. What are your favorite comics, man? What do you like about? What do you think makes for good comics, and what can games learn from them?
I collected comics for several years, and I was kind of just one of those superhero people who was into the like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and stuff like that. But there were certain books, like I picked up a Hellboy book one time, and that was like, oh, this is probably the coolest comic that I've ever seen before. And just seeing the books more as a form of art and not just conveying story and action was an inspiration. And then also, I don't know, something about stuff from the 70s, it's really vibrant and kind of surreal and abstract, but also because space is also kind of weird and you don't know what's in space exactly, so it's easier to just kind of imagine these strange designs and patterns and stuff.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I haven't read much stuff from the 70s, but just doing Google searches all the time for Jack Kirby and 1970s sci-fi comics. That was where I drew a lot of stuff from.
Yeah, and like I'm sure I'll get flack for this, but I feel like what attracts me to comic books and visual I'm sorry, graphic novels, not visual novels. Graphic novels as a medium is less often the writing and more often the art. I mean, like there's a lot of interesting storylines to be explored there and ways of expressing characters, but like really, when you come down to it, it's stuff like this. It's striking stuff that leaps off the page and sort of just grabs you and makes your imagination explode like a chubby robot taking off from a planet.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Sorry, for the Kickstarter, I realized I should do a comic book using the game. So I made, I think it's like 20 pages of a comic that is just using screenshots and then afterwards kind of moving them into panels and adding text and stuff like that. But that was really cool, kind of taking the game and again reformatting it into something completely different. And it worked pretty well as that kind of comic book.
Yeah, that's neat. And like not a lot of devs play with the medium in this way. Like not to say that they can't. It's just this game, this project seems uniquely suited to sort of making mock comic strips and putting art on gallery walls and stuff. That's the kind of stuff you could do, but it would be harder to do with like a white boxed 3D puzzle platformer level. But something we've sort of talked around that I realized I kind of want to get into, Gabriel, is like what's your day job, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I've been doing this full time since January, but before that, I did 3 years. It was just me and my boss, and we were doing kids apps like for painting, like kids coloring cats and tables and balls and stuff like that. So we were still using Unity, but it was a very different kind of project. So I learned lots of good technical skills doing that, but it was not anything super exciting to work on.
I don't know. I mean, but that's still that seems like a key piece of the story I should have asked about earlier. The idea that you've been using Unity for years to sort of create like do-it-yourself art, like digital coloring books, which are great and huge, and I appreciate. So how did you manage to stay sane while working a full-time job and then coming home at night and on weekends and working on this?
This was always like the fun part, kind of. It was like a treat to be able to sit down and say, okay, I'm just going to work on this for a couple hours now and see what we can do. And a lot of the time it was always, since I was the only person working on it, I could choose exactly what I wanted to work on. So it was always something that I did want to work on. I wouldn't ever sit down and be like, okay, well, I need to do this, but I don't want to. If there was something I didn't want to touch, I'd just leave it and it would be broken for a long time. And then I'd work on something that was fun, like whether it was prototyping visuals or playing with the animation system and fixing that kind of thing. It was always easy to stay sane because I would do exactly what I wanted to on the project.
Okay, so when I talk to devs who have done projects like this, they broadly fall into two categories, which is people who almost went crazy doing two things at once and need a break, or some people that feel refreshed by coming home at night or coming home on a weekend and getting to work on their own project and being excited about it. It sounds like maybe this was more the second category for you than the first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's neat. How did you keep yourself on track, or did you really worry about that at all?
I didn't. Yeah, in the first year or two, it was way more kind of like take it or leave it. And I know it's hard to track development except for the screenshots, I think, because those are all timestamped. But other than that, I think there were probably a few months where the game just kind of got abandoned. Like I made at least 2 games during the time of this one being developed.
Huh.
And those are just like, okay, I'm going to drop that thing for a while and just make this other smaller project that took me a month or two to put together. And that was also nice because then I'd come back to the thing and I'd have new skills and be able to apply everything I'd learned making a small game to this one.
Yeah, I noticed you did some game jams, and that's always a cool, exciting thing to do. Did that help you in your both in your day job, but also in this project, like the idea of taking a break and going and doing something totally different and then coming back. Did that give you new perspective or new skills or both? Or
Definitely. I think the best thing about game jams is that it's such a short amount of time and you really can't spend too much time worrying about elements. You have to basically find the simplest, most fun, most interesting way to present your idea. And if you overthink it, then you're not going to finish the game and you're not going to have anything to show. And so it's definitely a good lesson doing game jams just to work on that part of the process, because ultimately when you're making something, you do want to get it out there, and even if it's not perfect or if there's things you would have liked to spend more time on, you want to get it out there, and then you can take everything you learn from that and apply it to the future project.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, and I think and being part of a good community too can be can really, I don't want to say make or break, but it can like really help or hinder a project depending on the dev, I guess. I've heard Vancouver has a really good, vibrant dev scene. Were you involved with that much, or were you mostly on your own?
I didn't. I mean, I had some friends help me with sound on the game, and they were really great. But other than that, a lot of my dev support came from Twitter, and like it was last November that I went to Double Fine's their Day of the Devs event.
Oh yeah.
And that was just, they saw one of my GIFs and thought, oh, that looks cool. Like, we'll invite you. And so that was my first time to really show the game to any kind of audience. And I think the best thing about the event was meeting all these other cool developers and like people who I looked up to as well. And so I met people like Rebecca, who's working on Ooblets, and Chris Wade, who's doing Sausage Sports Club. And afterwards we kept in touch, and it was great having these people that I could not only ask them to test the game out and give me their feedback, but also kind of bounce my concerns about just general development and what to do and that kind of thing. And that was huge for kind of getting the game finished in the last year.
Yeah, man, Ooblets especially looks amazing. It's super cool to see so many creators like. It sounds trite to say like expressing such unique and divergent styles, but man, there's never been a better time to be really into games as a medium. Which is also kind of the worst for devs, because there are so many interesting, fun, cute games coming out that it can be hard to stand out.
I did it. I found the volcano, Alex.
You did it! You put out a forest fire. I never did that. That's cool.
Yeah. You should try it, Alex. Maybe you should actually try helping other people for once.
I tried so hard for so long, dude. Okay, so something that I remembered, you mentioned that when this was originally a side-scroller, you were sort of like a platformer. You were saving people, and it sounded like there were actually people on screen. Something that's really interesting to me about this game is that the robot, Jettomero, constantly assumes that these planets are full of human beings, but you never see a person, and you never see any people. Was that a choice made just because you didn't want to deal with rendering tiny people, or was it a more of a narrative stylistic choice?
Yeah, I think it came down to being a technical issue, because I did at one point have people and they would run out of the buildings when you got close enough and they just kind of scatter off. But the main problem was that they were too small, and the amount of code that I had to write to keep them doing their thing, it was definitely slowing down the system. So yeah, it would have been fun to have little people that some people might notice because they were tiny, but you might be like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's people. But I just had to cut it because it was too expensive for what it was offering.
Can you assuage my conscience by telling me that even though they're not there, they all evacuate the building before you smash it?
I'm sure they did. That's what the rocket ships are. They're evacuating. They're all loaded up. They know Jettomero's coming, and then it's the tanks and the saucers and those things which you're destroying. But
they all get out, Alex. They all make it out.
All right, I feel a lot better now. Brian, what do you think? This is your first time through. Are you pleasantly charmed? I found these ciphers to be surprisingly fun to solve.
Yeah, I'm just constantly like amazed at how each part of it like feels worthwhile. Although now I'm realizing I was making it way too hard for myself in the ciphers, and you can test stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, but it's chill, but it's also like it's missing part. Oddly, the only thing that isn't sticking with me is sort of the quick time events.
Yeah, so try dialing it down the difficulty. I found that actually
like the
nice.
difficulty's not bad. It's just it's just like everything else is so like responsive that the QuickTime like the rumble feed on the controller is really good when you're walking. Like the clicking noise in here is very satisfying, and the QuickTime events is just kind of like I've just sort of found myself like just sort of doing them, if you get my drift.
Yeah, sure.
And like
So
I don't know, that's not my best criticism ever.
no, but that's a good. So you mentioned the noise, right? The clicking sounds and everything. Jumping back, Gabriel, the one part of this project it sounds like that you didn't do yourself was the audio, right? You had friends help with that, and it sounds like that was like a barter thing. You helped them out with something. In return?
I still owe them some work, but we basically made it a cash-free interaction where just exchange of labor.
So how did that come about? Because everything I'm hearing from you is that you basically you love making things, you love games, you like Unity, and you basically taught yourself everything to make this game. Why did you shy away from audio? Why did you feel compelled to reach out to another more expert source when it came to the sound?
Yeah, it was funny because my background is sound design, and I think that maybe with that background, I knew that I wouldn't have the time and like full focus to really give it the treatment that I wanted to have. And there are a lot of sounds that I did and still in there, but there was just too much stuff, and I realized I didn't have all the tools I needed to get it done the way it needed to. And I can't remember how I started talking with Gordon from A Shell in the Pit, but we've kind of been we're big fans of each other, and we just started talking like, oh well, if you want to do some programming for me, we could do sounds for you. And I thought, yeah, that would be perfect, because then I don't need to worry about this part of the development. And like I wasn't totally the game didn't need to be just me, but it ended up just being that way because it's hard to find people that are going to do this stuff for you. And so once we got that labor exchange worked out, it was kind of the perfect solution. Like I would recommend that to any indie looking to get help in certain elements. Is just like you might not have the budget for it, but you do have the skills to help someone else with stuff, and that's huge. And you can both get people or both get things done that would otherwise cost you a lot more than it does if you're trading skills. Yeah,
so it sounds like really you did have the benefits of I hate to use this word, but the benefits of networking with colleagues, even though maybe it's not the traditional like go to a game dev meetup and then meet folks. This may be a weird thing to answer, but how did you know that that was the right thing to reach out to somebody else for, and everything else was something you could do on your own? Or did it really just kind of like end up that way where you kind of just made everything and then you decided to reach out for sound help?
Yeah, I think it was kind of incidental. Like it might have been Gordon that proposed it to me, because I was asking people on Twitter if they wanted to do any models for me, I think, in a labor exchange. Or I wanted help with the monsters, because that was another thing that I was like, I don't have the time to like give this proper justice. And I found one guy who ended up drawing concept sketches of all the monsters, and then I based all the models off of that, which was super helpful because it was kind of a different look. And I always find that if someone else does something, then I like it more, just because you become really critical of your own work, and having someone else's contribution, it distances you from it in a good way, so that you can say, okay, that's really cool, and you don't become self-critical about it.
Yeah, I think you're right, and like I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's very tempting standing here on the outside to say, oh well, you reached out for help on the sound portion because that's what you know best is sound, and so you know best how bad it could be. Whereas like if you were just teaching yourself to code physics setups and to code graphics filters and stuff, like you don't know how bad that could go or how hard it could be until you're right in the middle of it. But so Brian, are you gonna fight that monster?
I'm working on fighting that monster.
You gotta fight that monster. So something we also like kind of like to check in on, and it's cool if you don't want to talk about it, but I think it helps other developers, is what it's like to try and sell an indie game in 2017. Now we talked a bit about this earlier and trying to get the word out, but are you interested in continuing as a full-time indie dev, or do you think it's probably better to have a full-time job and then sort of do this on the side?
I think depends on how sales go. I might be able to fund myself for another half year or something once the PlayStation version comes out. We'll see. But yeah, I think it does help a lot to have a full-time job, just so you don't feel the pressure, and so you can play more. Like, because on this game, especially, the experimentation process and just kind of letting things grow organically wouldn't have happened if I was under pressure. Like, okay, I need to get this game done in 2 years, and I have this much time and this much money. Having an alternate source of income that was funding everything, and then having a little bit of time here and there to work on it was way more helpful, especially for just starting out and testing ideas, I think.
What's an example, if you can remember one, of something that came about only because you had the freedom to play around?
Like the animation system was kind of an incidental thing. I originally just was going to do animations in Blender, I guess, and I had them in the game working, and then I think I saw a trailer for Grow Home, and I was like, that looks hilarious. And also, it's another Red Robot, so I started playing with stuff in Unity with that, and the initial prototypes were just using like a Y as the gravity axis, which made it a lot easier. Once I brought it into trying to walk around on a 360-degree globe, trying to figure out where gravity was coming from and balance that, I had to come up with a lot of hacks to make it actually work. And that was probably, like, locomotion was maybe 2 months of prototyping, and I think that if I had to figure all that out in like a week's time or 2 weeks' time, it would have been too condensed and wouldn't have given me enough time off to just kind of step away and think about it differently. And that was really helpful, not being full time for something like that.
And I mean that decision to play around with that seems huge to the final product. Like, like the procedural goofiness of the protagonist is like one of the key aspects of this game, I think. So I mean, I'm sure it would have been good if it had all been done in Blender and just automatic, but that adds a certain something.
Yeah, I don't even know. It wouldn't have been nearly as good. I think it's so important now, that element of the character, that it's procedural.
I love that. Like, can we just talk for a second how you did the thing where every time you go through a wormhole, he's always perfectly silhouetted against what appears to be like a graphic illustration of a little system. Like, was that? I mean, I should know it was on purpose. Was that tricky at all, or was it relatively easy?
It uses the same code as when you're in space, where no matter where the camera's looking, Jettomero will always turn to face you, and I basically just kind of slowly rotate the hips around so Jettomero will always follow you, which I think is super cute. And then in the wormhole, it does the same thing, where you can play with Jettomero on the right stick and turn the head on the left stick, but otherwise Jettomero will by default just kind of rotate back to where you are. Nice.
Another small detail that jumped out to me while I was playing that is probably not a big deal, but I found it really charming, is the light. The way that, and you can see it here as Brian's playing, so he crosses back and forth between day and night. The light strikes Jettomero and illuminates him in different areas. Was that tricky at all to implement, or was it just kind of a simple application of directional light?
It was tricky because it's a 360-degree galaxy, and normally with directional lights you have, this is where the sun is, but in this case it was the sun's in the middle, and you can go to the backside of the sun. And so I played with things like rotating the directional light based on, so it would always follow Jettomero, but then you'd look across the galaxy and you'd see a planet that was completely black, even though it was facing the sun. So the way I fixed that eventually was using a point light, which wouldn't render shadows for me. So I have the main sun broadcasting out a point light, and then all the planets, once you get within range of them, they'll create a blocker that basically blocks the main point light and then turns on a spotlight, and that's where the shadows come from. So it's got a light that's way closer, that's basically pretending to be the sun, but that's where you get the shadows from, because otherwise there was no good way to get the shadows and have everything illuminated at the same time. So it's a few different hacks there. Nice.
Brian, do you have any? I've sort of been rambling over this whole conversation, but as we begin to sort of wrap up our hour, we have any questions given your time?
What's the point of? Well, I have two questions. One, what's the point of these ring challenges, sort of Star Foxy ring challenges that I keep messing up? And then, I'll ask my second question after I get my first one answered.
The rings are basically, it is kind of like a Star Foxy thing, and it's just for anyone who wants that extra challenge. I think it is too difficult, but once like I can do it pretty much every time now, so I've lost context of how difficult it is. And I know that some people might want that level of challenge, but basically once you fly through 10 of them, then you'll go to a secret location where you can do something that just changes the appearance of Jettomero slightly.
Oh. I guess I should actually try and hit all 10 of them, but like you said, it's very hard.
Yeah.
Brian, what was your second question?
Yeah, so like there are these little like chasing the storms away, finding the treasure, putting out that forest fire earlier. These are little achievements that sort of I'm collecting on Xbox Live right now. Oh god. Sorry everyone.
You got this.
What? All those came into space with me and they're gone. How did you decide to put those like little activities in there, and how did you do people respond to them well and stuff? Like, is this something that like devs should consider if they're making these little toy boxes?
Yeah, that was unfortunately something that came in pretty late because the feedback I was getting from people is they wanted more little challenges like that, and it was tough trying to figure out things that would work because the controls are super simple, and trying to add something where you're not just like ultimately all those little challenges are like walk into something or destroy it, or basically those are the only two things you can do in the game anyway. So adding extra challenges like that was something I tried to do with the forest fire and the burning building and stuff, but yeah, it was tricky trying to figure out how to create more interactions like that.
Mm-hmm. I just wanted to, we didn't get in earlier, but Aerotron says Jettomero looks fantastic, and they just wanted to say congrats.
Thanks.
Yeah. I guess lastly, before I'll go, like you're in the rare position of actually getting to be, as Alex said, as I refer to, a one-man band. So how, like, I guess kind of what's your personal take as a game developer that you were trying to put into this game? Like not many developers get to say that their game is sort of an expression of their ideas. And is there anything that you want to express beyond what we talked about earlier about like dark games make you think, sort of?
Yeah, I don't want to tell anyone what I intended for the themes, because then once I've told someone, then it's the Inception's not going to work.
Yeah.
It is
I guess
very fun.
I guess we can go broader, like as a game creator, like what kind of games do you want to make as your career goes forward?
Yeah, it's like the next game I want to do might be more gameplay focused and less of an art thing, but at the same time, I think I'll always be interested in creating experience stuff like this where it's just a focus on the visuals and the music. And because I really enjoy making music too, it's like the first game I ever made was kind of just a way for me to make the music for the game, and then the game was like it was its own thing, but it was the primary reason for making that game was so I could do the soundtrack. And I definitely look forward to doing more game soundtracks. So it's kind of like, what kind of music do I want to make, and where is that going to take the game?
I mean, that begs the question, something I've been sort of wondering this whole time, which is why games? You seem like somebody who's very creative and has an interest in a lot of different areas, including especially music making. So what is it about the idea and the effort required to make a game that appeals to you?
Well, like I went to school for video production, and trying to make a movie, I need at least like 3 people, and then it's like the bare bones movie, and that's a lot of work, and you're putting in time, and everyone has to be at the location. Whereas making games, you can just kind of sit at your computer for a month, and you'll have something very cool after that. You haven't had to work with anyone else. You haven't had to rely on the weather being good or anything like that. So it's a lot simpler to make a game as a creative work. And then there's also way less games than any other art form out there right now. I think like if I was just making music, then there's so much music being produced, and making music for a game, it's way more likely that someone's going to hear it because they'll pick up the game, because there's just less games to play, and it's kind of a cool medium that way, that there's more of an audience just because of there's less content right now.
That's a really good perspective to hear, because all we hear typically enmeshed in the industry is there are too many games. So it's good to remember there's too much of everything at this point.
Yeah.
You hear it from me trying to book games for this show. Yeah, Alex, do you have any more questions, or should we just wrap it up?
No, this is great. This has been fun. Thank you
Oh.
so much, Gabriel. This has been rad. Brian, you
Yeah,
want to?
thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah.
I need you, Alex. I need you to stall while I fight this monster.
Okay. How's Vancouver right now?
It's a beautiful day. I think I'm gonna go for a walk after this.
Oh, that's the best. I think I'm gonna go out for a walk after this too. Down in Alameda, we finally have fall, so I'm very excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
It turned into summer again in LA. Dang it.
I'm sorry.
Um,
Oh.
all right. Well, while I decrypt this, you have all been watching the Gamasutra Twitch channel, and we're super happy that y'all decided to join us today. And we're also super thankful for Gabriel for joining us today. Gabriel, if they have more questions about your work, where can they find you?
I'm on Twitter at Ghost Time Games, and you can go to my website as well. It has my email, and I'm always happy to answer questions about anything dev related or otherwise.
Nice. If you have watched this chat and you want to see more cool games and talk to their developers about making them, we would appreciate it if you followed us on the, just scroll down and click that follow button. If you do that, you'll get notification, and you make sure your notifications are on, you will find out when we are live. As otherwise, I've been Brian Francis, a contributing editor at Gamasutra. Alex, who have you been?
Oh man, I have been somebody who in the past year has grown more and more excited about the idea of being loaded into an invulnerable robot and shot into space. Also, I'm Alex Waro, editor at Gamasutra.com. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.